He thought he lost his wife in a tragic accident. 10 years later, she suddenly appeared at his wedding ceremony. "Hi, my most deeply cherished, honored, and irreplaceable family. How are you, my heart? This is your Mr. Peter, and I come to you today with a heart overflowing in love. You are not just names on a screen. You are my strength, my purpose, my family in spirit and truth, my royal queens, my mighty kings, my precious daughters and sons. Each of you is a heartbeat in my soul. You lift me, heal me, and give me the courage to rise every single day. I thank God endlessly for the gift of you. A prayer so pure, it was written in heaven for you. May your heart be wrapped in peace that no storm can touch. May joy dance through your soul like sunlight through leaves. I pray that your pain turns into power, your silence into song, and your tears into pearls of glory. May your days be drenched in favor, your nights filled with sweet rest, and your steps ordered by divine love. You are not alone. You are chosen. You are endlessly adored. But my heart aches when I see silence. When you don't like or comment, it feels like I'm forgotten. My beautiful family, does your love still beat for Mr. Peter? If it does, show me. Let's reach 1,000 likes together, not just as viewers, but as a family that stands unshakable in love. Please like, comment, and share, because this is not just content. This is our home, our bond, our legacy. Let's begin hand in hand, heart to heart, my beloved eternal family. Robert Howell straightened his custom-tailored Brioni suit as he stepped out of his Bentley Continental at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual charity gala. At 34, he had already amassed billions through shrewd investment banking. His firm, Howell Capital, managing the wealth of the world's elite. Financial magazines regularly featured his handsome face on their covers, but tonight his mind wasn't occupied with market strategies or acquisition targets. Across the opulent gallery, he spotted a woman unlike any other among the crowd of socialites and power brokers. While others displayed their wealth with diamonds and designer labels, she wore a simple blue dress with only pearl earrings for adornment. Her natural elegance caught his attention. Her warm smile held it. "Who is she?" Robert asked a colleague, nodding discreetly toward the intriguing woman. "Alicia Renee, daughter of Marcus Renee, that rabble-rousing social activist who's always protesting against the 1%. She works in the museum's community outreach program." Robert raised an eyebrow. Marcus Renee was infamous for his vocal criticism of wealth inequality and corporate power. The irony wasn't lost on Robert, finding himself drawn to the daughter of a man who considered everything Robert represented morally corrupt. Despite this, Robert found himself moving across the room, pulled by an undeniable magnetism. "I don't believe we've met," he said, extending his hand. "Robert Howell." Alicia Renee looked up, her dark eyes widening slightly in recognition. "The investment banker," she replied, a hint of wariness in her voice as she shook his hand. "My father has mentioned your firm. All good things, I'm sure," Robert said with a self-deprecating smile. "Actually, he called you the epitome of unchecked capitalist exploitation," Alicia replied, though her lips curved slightly. Robert laughed genuinely, unexpectedly charmed by her honesty. "Well, he's entitled to his opinion. And what's yours? Try not to judge people based on their bank accounts or my father's opinions," she answered diplomatically. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease, revealing Alicia's passion for arts education in underserved communities. When her father appeared, his expression hardened at seeing Robert. "Mr. Howell," Marcus Renee acknowledged stiffly, "I wasn't aware you were interested in community arts programs. I'm interested in many things that might surprise you," Robert replied smoothly, his eyes briefly meeting Alicia's. That first meeting sparked an unlikely courtship. Robert began appearing at community events where Alicia volunteered, trading his bespoke suits for more casual attire that still couldn't disguise his wealth. His chauffeur-driven car and platinum credit cards marked him as an outsider in neighborhoods. where Marcus Rene was revered as a champion of the working class. "Why are you here?" Marcus confronted him after the third such appearance. "If you think Alicia is some exotic adventure for a bored billionaire, I'm here because I admire her work," Robert interrupted, "and because I enjoy her company. Nothing more complicated than that." But it was more complicated. Each interaction deepened Robert's fascination with Alicia's intelligence and compassion. She challenged his perspectives while he opened doors to a world she had only criticized from afar. Their differences created a dynamic tension that neither had experienced before. On their fifth date, which Alicia insisted on keeping secret from her father, Robert took her to the rooftop restaurant of a building he owned, the Manhattan skyline, glittering around them. "All this wealth," Alicia mused, gazing at the panorama. "Yet 3 blocks from here, children attend schools without proper heating or enough books. Which is why I've been looking into your father's education initiative." Robert replied, "I think Howell Capital could provide significant funding without the usual corporate strings attached." Alicia studied him carefully. "Is this about me? Some elaborate gesture to win my approval?" "Perhaps initially," Robert admitted with refreshing honesty. "But I've been reading your father's proposals. They're sound. They make sense. Just because I've benefited from the system doesn't mean I can't see its flaws." Their relationship progressed despite Marcus Rene's vehement objections. When Alicia finally confessed to her father that she was seeing Robert, his reaction was explosive. "A banker, the very embodiment of everything we've fought against?" Marcus paced their modest apartment. "These people exploit the system, Alicia. Their wealth comes from others' poverty." "He's more than his money, Dad," Alicia argued. "If you'd just meet with him. I've met enough men like him to last a lifetime." Yet Alicia persisted, bringing Robert to dinner at her father's apartment. Robert arrived without his usual trappings of wealth, though his cashmere sweater still likely cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. "Mr. Rene," Robert said, accepting a glass of inexpensive wine without commentary, "I understand your skepticism. I would probably feel the same in your position. Then you understand why I don't want my daughter involved with someone whose values are fundamentally opposed to everything she was raised to believe," Marcus replied bluntly. "Dad!" Alicia protested. "It's a fair concern," Robert acknowledged, "but I'd argue that our values aren't as opposed as you might think. We both want a world where people have opportunities to succeed, where children receive quality education, where communities thrive. The difference is that I want these things for everyone, not just for those who can afford them," Marcus countered. The evening continued in similar fashion, with Marcus challenging Robert's worldview at every turn. Yet Robert neither became defensive nor condescending, engaging genuinely with Marcus's critiques of the financial system. By the end of the night, while far from convinced, Marcus had at least acknowledged that Robert wasn't the soulless capitalist he had imagined. When Robert proposed to Alicia 3 months later, she accepted immediately. Marcus, however, refused his blessing. "He may be better than most of his kind," he conceded when Alicia pleaded with him. "But that world will change you, Alicia. The wealth, the privilege, it alters people's perspective." Robert's second attempt to gain Marcus's approval ended similarly, as did his third. Each rejection stung not for his own sake, but for Alicia's, who was torn between her love for Robert and her close relationship with her father. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. The children's hospital in the underprivileged neighborhood where Marcus had devoted much of his activist work was facing closure due to funding cuts. The community had been fighting to save it, but the deadline for securing necessary funds was approaching with little hope in sight. When Marcus arrived at the hospital board meeting where the final decision was to be announced, he was stunned to learn that an anonymous donor had provided not only enough money to save the hospital, but to expand its services and modernize its facilities, with the stipulation that it remain accessible to all, regardless of ability to pay. It took Marcus less than a day to discover the donor's identity. He confronted Robert in his downtown office, bypassing assistance and security with the determined stride that had made him a formidable community organizer. "Why?" he demanded, standing before Robert's expansive desk. "Why do this anonymously? No press release, no corporate name on the building, no tax write-off." Robert set aside the documents he'd been reviewing. "Because it was the right thing to do, not for recognition, not for business advantage, and not even to impress you or Alicia." He met Marcus's gaze steadily. "Some things matter more than money or credit." "You really love her," Marcus said, realization dawning in his expression. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone," Robert confirmed simply. Marcus studied him for a long moment before offering his hand. "If you ever hurt her—" "I won't," Robert promised, grasping the offered hand firmly. Their wedding reflected both worlds, held in the botanical garden where Alicia volunteered, with touches of elegance that never crossed into ostentation. When Marcus walked his daughter down the aisle, his expression mixed pride with lingering caution. But as he placed Alicia's hand in Robert's, the stern activist gave a single, definitive nod of approval. Robert and Alicia exchanged vows beneath an archway of wildflowers, their words personal and heartfelt rather than traditional. The guest list blended Manhattan's elite with community organizers and activists, creating unlikely conversations across social divides. In his toast, Marcus acknowledged his initial misgivings while expressing cautious hope for the union of two people from vastly different worlds. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Robert held Alicia close. "Thank you for seeing beyond the banker to the man," he whispered. "Thank you for proving my father wrong about wealthy men," she replied with a smile that promised a lifetime of challenging and supporting each other. The celebration continued. Late into the evening, a testament to the couple's ability to bridge seemingly insurmountable differences with love and mutual respect. When they departed for their brief honeymoon, Robert had an important merger to oversee the following week. They left behind a gathering where wealth and activism had found, if not harmony, at least a temporary détente. As their car pulled away, Alicia looked back at the botanical garden glowing with fairy lights. "Do you think it's always going to be this complicated?" she asked. "Balancing our different worlds?" Robert took her hand, his expression serious. "Probably, but nothing worth having comes easily." He pressed a kiss to her palm. "And you, Alicia Renee Howell, are worth any complexity the world throws our way." In that moment, despite the obstacles they had overcome, and those that surely lay ahead, both believed that their love was strong enough to withstand whatever challenges might come, a conviction that would be tested sooner and more severely than either could possibly imagine. Chapter 2: Family Bliss. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Howell penthouse, illuminating Alicia as she cradled baby Zara in the nursery. The apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a prestigious Upper East Side building, with views of Central Park that real estate agents would describe as priceless, though Robert had, in fact, paid an astronomical sum for them. "The markets are up in Asia," Robert said as he entered the nursery, already dressed in a tailored charcoal Armani suit, his appearance impeccable, save for the burp cloth draped over his shoulder, a concession to new parenthood. Alicia looked up from their daughter and smiled. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Banker." Robert's expression softened as he crossed the room, custom Italian shoes silent on the plush carpet. He placed a gentle kiss on Alicia's forehead, then bent to do the same. To Zara's downy head, At 11 months old, their daughter was already showing Alicia's warm brown eyes and Robert's determined chin. "Sorry," he said. "Habit. The Tokyo Exchange is—" "It's fine," Alicia interrupted with an affectionate smile. "Your financial brilliance pays for this nursery that's bigger than my dad's first apartment." The nursery, like the rest of their home, represented a compromise between Robert's wealth and Alicia's more modest sensibilities. The furniture was expensive but not ostentatious. The designer wallpaper featured characters from classic children's books, and the mobile hanging above the custom crib had been handmade by children at Alicia's arts program. Robert gently took Zara into his arms. Despite his power in boardrooms commanding billions in transactions, nothing made him feel more invincible than holding his daughter. "Are we still on for the Switzerland trip next month? For Zara's first birthday?" "Absolutely," Alicia replied, stretching her arms above her head, "though I still think we could celebrate just as well in Central Park." "My daughter turns one only once," Robert said, his tone playfully defensive. "And we never took a proper honeymoon. I want to give both of my girls something special." Alicia stood and wrapped her arms around him, careful not to disturb Zara. "You give us special things every day." "This will be different," Robert promised. "No business calls, no board meetings, no market watching. Just the three of us." The planning for their Swiss getaway reflected Robert's detailed approach to everything in life. He arranged for his private jet to fly them to Zurich, where a helicopter would transport them to an exclusive resort in Lucerne. For Zara's birthday celebration, he chartered a luxury yacht on Lake Lucerne. Not an enormous showy vessel, but an elegant 60-footer with a professional crew of 5 and a private chef. The night before their departure, Robert worked late, ensuring his banking team could handle operations during his absence. Howell Capital managed investments for some of the world's wealthiest individuals and institutions, and even a short absence required meticulous preparation. "You should come to bed," Alicia said, appearing in the doorway of his home office around midnight. "Our flight leaves in 7 hours. Robert looked up from his dual monitors, where complex financial models glowed in the dimly lit room. "Just finishing up. Johnson needs these risk assessments before the Asian markets open." Alicia crossed the room and gently closed his laptop. "The markets will survive without Robert Howell for 10 days. He caught her hand and kissed it. "You're right. The Swiss Alps await." Their arrival in Switzerland was seamless. The transition from plane to helicopter to resort managed with the efficiency that Robert's wealth commanded. The presidential suite at Lucerne's most exclusive hotel offered panoramic views of the mountains and lake, with separate rooms for Zara and her nanny, whom Alicia had insisted they bring along to allow for some private time together. "It's breathtaking," Alicia said, as they stood on their suite's balcony, the majestic Alps rising before them, their peaks still snow-capped, even in summer. Robert wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Worth missing that board meeting?" "Definitely." She leaned back against him, "though I'm still not convinced Zara needs a yacht for her birthday. She'd be just as happy with a cake and some colorful balloons." "The yacht isn't entirely for Zara," Robert admitted. "I wanted to give you that sailing trip we never got to take during our abbreviated honeymoon." Alicia turned in his arms. "Always. And thinking ahead, aren't you, Mr. Investment Banker? It's how I built my fortune," he replied with a smile. "Strategic planning and calculated risks." "And marrying me? Was that a strategic decision too?" she teased. Robert's expression grew serious. "That was the most irrational, illogical, non-strategic decision I've ever made." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And the best one, by far." On the morning of Zara's birthday, Robert woke before the others. He stood on the suite's balcony, breathing in the crisp alpine air. For a man whose life was measured in financial, Quarters and market fluctuations, the timelessness of the mountains provided a rare moment of perspective. The year since Zara's birth had transformed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Fatherhood had softened some of his harder edges, giving him a deeper appreciation for life beyond balance sheets and profit margins. Watching Alicia as a mother had only deepened his love for her, her natural grace with their daughter, her patience during sleepless nights, her determination to instill values of compassion and gratitude despite their privileged circumstances. Later that day, as their chartered yacht glided across the pristine blue waters of Lake Lucerne, Robert watched Alicia help Zara blow out the single candle on her birthday cake. His phone remained off, stored in his jacket pocket. For perhaps the first time since founding his banking empire, Robert Howell was completely present, disconnected from the financial world that usually consumed his attention. "Happy birthday, little one," he whispered, joining his wife and daughter on the yacht's cushioned seating area. The small celebration included just the three of them, the captain maintaining a discreet distance at the helm. "To our amazing daughter," Robert said, raising a glass of champagne, "and to us for surviving a year of parenthood while managing a global financial firm." Alicia touched her glass to his. I'm not sure which was more challenging. They fed Zara tiny bites of cake, laughing as she smeared frosting across her face with unabashed delight. The yacht's chef had prepared a gourmet lunch, which they enjoyed. As they cruised past picturesque villages nestled along the shoreline, "I was thinking," Robert said as they relaxed after the meal, Zara napping contentedly on a cushioned lounge. "Maybe we should consider having another child soon. Give Zara a brother or sister close to her age." Alicia looked at him with surprise. "We've barely mastered handling one baby while juggling our careers." "I know, but," Robert glanced at their sleeping daughter, "being a family has been the most meaningful experience of my life. More than all the deals and acquisitions, more than the billions." He took Alicia's hand. "And watching you with Zara, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Alicia's expression softened. "You do realize you're the only billionaire banker who would consider expanding his family a better investment than expanding his portfolio." "Diversification is key to any successful strategy," Robert replied with a grin. "Besides, think of the tax advantages." Alicia laughed, the sound carrying across the calm waters. "There's the pragmatic businessman I married." She leaned forward to kiss him. "Let's enjoy this vacation before planning any new additions." As afternoon stretched toward evening, Robert noticed darkening clouds gathering behind the western mountains. "Perhaps we should begin heading back," he suggested to the captain. "It looks like weather might be moving in." "The forecast shows clear conditions, sir," the captain replied confidently. "Those clouds are likely to pass north of us, but we can certainly return if you prefer." Robert glanced at Alicia and Zara, both napping peacefully on a cushioned lounge. "Let's give them a few more minutes of rest, but keep an eye on those clouds." He settled beside his family, allowing himself a rare moment of complete contentment. In the competitive world of high finance, Robert Howell was known for his sharp instincts and calculated risk assessment. Today, however, he failed to recognize the greatest risk of all. The yacht cut smoothly through the water, leaving barely a ripple in its wake. Above them, the sky was still a perfect blue directly overhead, with only the distant mountains showing signs of the gathering storm. The weather forecast had predicted perfect conditions for the entire day. None of the expensive equipment on the luxury vessel detected the storm system forming behind the western mountains, approaching with unexpected speed toward the lake. Unlike ocean storms that could be tracked for days, this alpine tempest had formed in the mountain valleys, channeled and intensified by the unique topography surrounding Lake Lucerne. As the sun began its descent toward the jagged alpine peaks, casting golden light across the tranquil waters, Robert Howell held his sleeping wife's hand, his sleeping daughter just inches away. In this perfect tableau of family contentment, he remained blissfully unaware that within hours his world would shatter completely. Chapter 3. The tragedy. The storm struck with apocalyptic fury. One moment, the lake was a mirror reflecting perfect blue sky. The next, it had transformed into a churning cauldron beneath a blackened heaven. Wind shrieked through the yacht's rigging as waves that should have been impossible on a lake crashed over the bow. "Get below deck!" the captain shouted over the sudden roar. "We're heading for shelter." Robert scooped the now screaming Zara from the lounge, where she had been napping, clutching her protectively against his chest as Alicia struggled to maintain her balance on the pitching deck. The luxury vessel's stabilization systems fought valiantly against forces they had never been designed to withstand. "This way," Robert directed, guiding Alicia toward the cabin stairs with his free arm. The yacht lurched violently, sending crystal glasses and fine china crashing across the deck. Despite its premium engineering and safety features, the vessel was dangerously vulnerable to the freak storm's intensity. They had just reached the companionway when a massive wave struck the yacht's starboard side. The impact threw Robert against the bulkhead, while Alicia slid across the rain-slicked deck toward the railing. "Robert," she cried, managing to grab a fixed table to stabilize herself. "Take care of Zara," Alicia called as she fought to keep her grip. "I'll meet you below." Robert hesitated for a split second, torn between his wife and child, before prioritizing the screaming infant in his arms. He descended the stairs carefully, fighting against the yacht's erratic movements to reach the main cabin. The interior, all polished wood and luxurious appointments, had become a maze of shifting furniture and sliding objects. Robert placed Zara on the center of a built-in couch, quickly surrounding her with cushions to prevent her from falling. "Stay here, princess. Daddy's going to get Mommy." He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead before turning back toward the stairs. Before he could reach them, a horrific sound of tearing metal reverberated through the yacht. The vessel shuddered violently, then began listing to port. Alarms blared throughout the cabin as emergency lights activated. "We've hit the rocks!" The captain's voice came through the intercom system. "Everyone put on life jackets immediately. Prepare to abandon ship." Cold fear gripped Robert's heart as he realized the severity of their situation. He grabbed life jackets from a nearby storage compartment, securing one around Zara before donning his own. Then he fought his way back toward the stairs, intent on reaching Alicia. The yacht's increasing tilt made the ascent treacherous. When Robert finally emerged onto the deck, rain lashed at his face with stinging force. The elegant vessel was now visibly damaged, one side partially submerged as water poured in through a gash in the hull. "Alicia!" he shouted, scanning the chaos for his wife. "Over here!" Her voice came faintly from the far side of the yacht, barely audible over the storms. "Roar!" Robert spotted her clinging to a railing near the master cabin entrance. Somehow, during the violent pitching, she had been thrown toward the stern while trying to make her way below deck. Now, with the yacht's structural integrity compromised, a 15-foot gap of violently shifting deck separated them. "Hold on," he called, calculating how to reach her without endangering either of them further. Before he could move, the yacht lurched again, this time accompanied by the ominous groaning of metal under stress. The captain appeared beside him. Life jacket. Secured, his professional calm belied by the urgency in his voice. "Sir, we need to evacuate now. The life raft is being deployed on the port side." "My wife is trapped on the starboard side," Robert replied, pointing toward where Alicia still clung to the railing. The captain assessed the situation with practiced eyes. "The vessel is breaking apart, Mr. Howell. We have minutes, possibly seconds." As if to emphasize his point, another section of the yacht's structure gave way with a sickening crack. The gap between Robert and Alicia widened further as the two halves of the vessel began to separate. From below deck, Zara's terrified screams suddenly intensified. The sound cut through Robert's heart like a blade. Looking back toward the cabin stairs, he saw water beginning to pour down into the main salon where he had left his daughter. "Robert!" Alicia called across the divide, her voice steady despite the terror evident in her eyes. "Get Zara!" "I'm not leaving you," Robert countered, looking frantically for a way to bridge the expanding gap. "The baby comes first," Alicia insisted. "You know that's right. Save our daughter." In that moment, Robert faced the most impossible choice of his life, his wife or his child. The financial titan, who made multi-billion-dollar decisions daily, found himself utterly paralyzed by this most primal of dilemmas. Across the widening gap, Alicia met his gaze. In that moment of connection, something unspoken passed between them. A lifetime of love and understanding distilled into a single look. "Save our daughter, Robert," Alicia said, her voice somehow reaching him through the chaos. "Please, I'll find a way." It was the certainty in her eyes that finally broke his paralysis. With anguish tearing at his heart, he turned and rushed back, below deck, to rescue Zara. The main cabin was now ankle-deep in water. Zara wailed in terror from her cushioned enclosure as Robert lifted her into his arms. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured, though nothing was okay at all. "Daddy's got you." As the yacht continued to break apart, Robert joined the captain and remaining crew members at the life raft. With Zara clutched tightly against his chest, he was helped aboard the small inflatable vessel, which was already being tossed violently by the waves. "My wife is still on board," Robert shouted to the captain as the raft began to pull away from the disintegrating yacht. "We'll circle around to the starboard side," the captain replied, gesturing to a crew member to start the small outboard motor. But before they could maneuver, the horrifying sight of the yacht's stern section, where Alicia had been clinging to the railing, suddenly slipping beneath the churning waters, froze them all in stunned silence. "Alicia!" The scream tore from Robert's throat, primal and agonized. As he watched in helpless horror, the section of the yacht containing his wife disappeared completely beneath the waves. For one terrible moment he thought he saw her in the water, arms reaching upward. Then another wave crashed over the spot, and when it receded, there was nothing but churning foam. With Zara crying against his chest, Robert stared at the spot where Alicia had vanished. Disbelief warring with devastating comprehension. The captain directed the raft toward shore. Fighting the storm with every yard gained, Robert sat in shocked silence, mechanically cradling Zara close, his eyes never leaving the area where the yacht had disappeared. The luxury vessel that had cost millions, designed with every safety feature money could buy, had been rendered useless against nature's fury, and had taken from him something no amount of wealth could ever replace. Emergency responders reached them quickly, alerted by the yacht's automated distress signal. Helicopters circled overhead as soon as the worst of the storm passed, and rescue boats converged on the area. Robert and Zara were brought safely to shore, where paramedics waited to assess them. "Your daughter is fine, Mr. Howell," a medical technician assured him after examining Zara, "just cold and frightened." Robert nodded mechanically, his eyes fixed on the lake where search teams were already beginning to deploy. "My wife is still out there," he said, his voice hollow. "Search and rescue operations are underway, sir," a police officer informed him. "The storm is abating, which will make conditions more favorable." As night fell, Robert refused to leave the shoreline. He sat in a rescue vehicle with Zara finally asleep in his arms, watching the searchlights sweeping across the dark waters. His mind replayed the moment of choice again and again. Alicia's voice telling him to save their daughter, the look in her eyes that had conveyed all the words they hadn't time to say. "Mr. Howell," the search coordinator approached, his expression grave in the harsh lights of the emergency vehicles. We've located the wreckage using sonar equipment. Divers will go down at first light. Can't they go now? Robert demanded, the billionaire accustomed to having his requests immediately fulfilled. The conditions are too dangerous in the dark, sir. The divers would be risking their lives. For the first time, Robert felt the utter impotence of his wealth. All his billions couldn't command the sun to rise sooner or make the waters less treacherous. The realization was a second blow, almost as devastating as the first. I understand, he said quietly, but I want every available resource deployed. At dawn, whatever the cost. Yes, sir, the local authorities are already coordinating with specialized teams from Geneva. That night, in a hastily arranged suite at the nearest luxury hotel, Robert watched over his sleeping daughter while mentally calculating every possible scenario in which Alicia might have survived. Perhaps she had found an air pocket in the submerged cabin. Maybe she'd been thrown clear of the yacht and picked up by another vessel. Could she have made it to shore on a different section of the lake? As the rational part of his mind understood the unlikelihood of these possibilities, his heart refused to accept that Alicia could be gone. This vibrant, loving woman who had changed his life by seeing beyond his wealth to the man beneath. At dawn, Robert was back at the lakeshore, Zara in the care of a hotel staff member who had childcare experience. He watched as dive teams entered the water and sophisticated sonar equipment mapped the lake floor where the yacht had sunk. The vessel is in two main sections, the recovery team leader explained, pointing to grainy images on a monitor. The stern is at approximately 70 meters depth, the bow at 65. And my wife? Robert asked, the only question that mattered. We've found no signs of survivors yet, sir. The divers are doing a thorough examination of both sections. In the days that followed, Robert's wealth and influence transformed the small Swiss village into command central for what became one of the most extensive search operations in the region's history. He hired additional dive teams, brought in specialized underwater drones, contracted helicopters to survey every mile of shoreline. Money flowed without limit or question. Whatever was needed, whatever might help find Alicia. He rented every room in the small luxury hotel near the accident site, converting the lobby into an operations center filled with maps, sonar displays, and communications equipment. Local authorities, initially overwhelmed by the American billionaire's resources and determination, gradually developed a respect for his focused intensity and willingness to join the search efforts personally. After a week with no sign of Alicia, divers recovered several items from the yacht's master cabin, including her pearl earrings found on the small vanity where she must have left them before coming on deck. Robert held the simple jewelry in his palm, a tangible connection to his wife that broke through the numb shock he had maintained since the accident. She was wearing these the night we met, he told Marcus René, who had flown to Switzerland as soon as he received the devastating news. Just these and a simple blue dress, nothing flashy or expensive. Marcus, his initial hostility toward Robert, long since replaced by genuine respect and affection, placed a hand on his son-in-law's shoulder. She always valued substance over show. It's why she saw the real you. As days turned to weeks with no breakthrough, even Robert's limitless resources couldn't alter the growing consensus among search experts. The Swiss authorities approached him with compassionate directness. Mr. Howell, the police chief said gently, we have conducted one of the most thorough operations in this lake's history. Every technology, every expert, every method has been employed. After this much time, he paused, choosing his words carefully. We believe it is time to transition from a rescue operation to a recovery effort. The subtle shift in terminology from rescue to recovery struck Robert with the force of a physical blow. Until this moment, official reports had maintained the possibility, however slim, that Alicia might be found alive. This change acknowledged what logic had been telling him, but his heart had refused to accept. That night, alone on his hotel balcony overlooking the now placid lake, Robert finally confronted the unthinkable reality. Alicia, his love, his partner, the mother of his child, was gone. The woman who had changed his life by seeing beyond his wealth to the man beneath was never coming back. He clutched her pearl earrings in his palm, feeling their smooth surface against his skin. This small token all he had left of her physical presence. "I had to choose," he whispered into the darkness. "You told me to save her. I did what you asked. But God, Alicia, I would give everything I have to have saved you both." After a month of searching, with every possible avenue exhausted, Robert finally accepted what the authorities had been gently suggesting for weeks. It was time to return home, to take Zara back to New York, to begin the impossible task of building a life without Alicia. On their final morning in Switzerland, Robert stood at the lakeshore one last time, Zara balanced on his hip. The child was too young to understand what had happened, yet she had been asking for Mama with increasing confusion and distress. "Your mother loved you more than anything in this world," he told his daughter, his voice rough with emotion. "She made sure you would be safe, even when she couldn't be. I need you to remember that always." Robert Howell, the billionaire investment banker who had built an empire through calculated risk and strategic decision-making, boarded his private jet. That afternoon, having experienced the one loss that all his wealth could not prevent or repair. As the aircraft climbed above the Alps, he held his sleeping daughter close, knowing that for her sake he would need to find a way forward through the darkness that now enveloped his heart. What he couldn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that miles from where the yacht had sunk, in a remote alpine village beyond the search perimeter, a fisherman had pulled a barely breathing woman from the water in the storm's aftermath. A woman with no identification, no consciousness, and soon no memory of who she was, or the wealthy family desperately searching for her across the lake. Chapter 4. Endless Search. Robert Howell stood at the edge of Lake Lucerne as dawn broke. Over the Alps, his tall frame rigid with exhaustion and determination. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and stubble roughened his usually clean-shaven jaw. 24 hours had passed since the yacht carrying his family had been torn apart by the unexpected storm, and he hadn't slept a moment since. "The visibility is improving with the sunlight, Mr. Howell," reported the head of the dive team he had flown in from Geneva overnight. "We'll have teams in the water within the hour." Robert nodded, his gaze never leaving the deceptively peaceful surface of the lake that had swallowed his wife. "I want the entire wreck searched again, every compartment, every possible air pocket." "Yes, sir. We've also deployed the new sonar equipment you ordered. It should give us a more detailed image of the lake floor." In the chaos following the accident, Robert had acted with the decisiveness that had built his financial empire. Within hours of reaching shore with Zara, he had mobilized resources on a scale that staggered the local authorities. His private jet had shuttled in specialized equipment from across Europe. Helicopters he chartered now patrolled the lakeshore, scanning for any sign of Alicia. The small village nearest to the accident site had been transformed into command central for what was quickly becoming one of the most extensive search operations in Swiss history. "Mr. Howell," a hotel manager approached hesitantly, "the presidential suite has been prepared as you requested. Perhaps you should take your daughter there to rest. Our staff includes several experienced nannies who could—" "Zara stays with me," Robert interrupted, glancing at the makeshift shelter where his one-year-old daughter was currently sleeping under the watchful eye of an embassy official. Despite his desperate focus on finding Alicia, he had refused to be separated from Zara for more than a few minutes at a time. "Of course, sir. But you've been awake for... I'll rest when we find my wife." The manager retreated, leaving Robert alone with his fear and determination. In the day since the yacht sank, money had flowed from his accounts like water, chartering helicopters, hiring professional dive teams, flying in specialized sonar equipment from Germany. No expense was spared, no resource untapped if it might. Help locate Alicia. The local authorities had been politely skeptical when he'd announced his intentions. "Mr. Howell," the police chief had explained gently, "the lake is very deep where your yacht went down, over 700 feet in some areas. These operations are complicated." "I don't care," Robert had replied, his voice deadly calm. "Whatever it costs, whatever it takes." Now, 24 hours later, the lake swarmed with activity. Robert had rented every available hotel room in the village for search personnel, converted the hotel's conference room into an operations center, and established a direct line to his attorneys to cut through any bureaucratic obstacles. Around mid-morning, the operational leader of the dive team approached him on the shore. "Mr. Howell, we've completed another survey of the yacht using the advanced sonar," he reported, his weathered face grave. "She's in a deep part of the lake, about 650 feet down. Both sections have been thoroughly mapped." Robert's heart leapt. "And my wife?" The diver shook his head slowly. "We've found no signs of survivors in the vessel. The cabin where you last saw her was completely flooded, with no viable air pockets." Robert stared out at the lake, processing this information with external calm, while his inner world crumbled further. "Expand the search perimeter," he ordered. "She could have been thrown clear before the yacht went down. She's a strong swimmer." "Yes, sir. The helicopters are already surveying a 5-mile radius along the shoreline." As the sun climbed higher, Robert moved through the operation like a man possessed, reviewing sonar images, consulting with search experts, redirecting resources as needed. He fielded calls from his New York office, where executives were scrambling to manage without him, with terse instructions to handle everything until further notice. "Robert." A familiar voice cut through his focused haze late that afternoon. He turned to find Marcus Renee, who had taken the first available flight from New York upon hearing the news. Alicia's father looked haggard from travel and worry, his normally commanding presence diminished by fear. "Marcus," Robert's voice cracked as he embraced his father-in-law. The two men, once adversaries, now united in desperate hope and devastating fear. "How is Zara?" Marcus asked when they separated. "Physically unharmed. She's been asking for Alicia." Robert's control faltered slightly. "I don't know what to tell her." "And the search?" Robert led Marcus to the operations center, bringing him up to speed on all that had been done and what was still underway. The older man listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed his activist's understanding of resource mobilization. "You've done everything possible," Marcus finally said, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. "More than anyone could have." "It's not enough if we don't find her," Robert replied, the first hint of his bone-deep exhaustion showing through. "When did you last sleep?" Marcus asked, studying his son-in-law's haggard appearance. "Sleep isn't important right now." "It is if you're going to continue making decisions that might help find my daughter," Marcus countered with gentle firmness. "You need to rest, even for a few hours. I'll watch over the operations and wake you if there's any development." Robert started to protest, but the rational part of his mind, the part that had built a financial empire through strategic thinking, recognized the wisdom in Marcus's words. He allowed himself to be led to the suite where Zara was sleeping, under the nanny's supervision. For 3 hours, Robert slept the dreamless sleep of complete exhaustion. When he woke, it was to the terrible reality that nothing had changed. Alicia was still missing, and with each passing hour, the statistical likelihood of finding her alive diminished. He rejoined the search effort with renewed determination, his temporary rest only sharpening his focus. As evening approached again, he stood with Marcus on the hotel's private dock, watching the search boats crisscrossing the lake with powerful spotlights. The Swiss authorities say they've never seen a search operation this extensive, Marcus commented, his academic detachment a thin veneer over his anguish. It still may not be enough, Robert replied. As darkness fell, the hotel manager approached with a delegation of local officials, their expressions somber. Mr. Howell, Mr. Renee, the police chief greeted them. We have a request to discuss with you. Inside the operations center, the officials presented their concerns. The scale of the search was straining local resources, disrupting normal emergency services, and creating logistical challenges for the small village. We are not suggesting terminating the search, the chief clarified quickly, but perhaps scaling back to a more sustainable level. Money is no object, Robert replied flatly. If resources are the issue, name your price. It's not simply a matter of funding, an official from the regional government explained. There are limitations to what can be physically accomplished, even with unlimited budget. The lake has been thoroughly searched to a degree unprecedented in our records. And yet, we haven't found her, Robert countered. The conversation continued, in this vein, until Marcus intervened with the diplomatic skill of a seasoned negotiator. By the meeting's end, a compromise had been reached. The search would continue at current levels for another week, after which it would be reassessed based on findings. Days blurred together as Robert maintained his grueling vigil. Each morning, he was at the lake by dawn, holding Zara in his arms as he watched the search teams deploy. Each night, he reviewed the day's findings, approved expenditures without question, and planned the next day's efforts before falling into exhausted sleep for a few insufficient hours. On the fifth day, divers recovered personal items from the master cabin of the yacht, including Alicia's pearl earrings, found on the small vanity where she must have left them before coming on deck that fateful afternoon. Robert held the simple jewelry in his palm, memories flooding back of the night. They'd first met at the Metropolitan Museum Gala, when these pearls had been her only adornment among a crowd dripping with diamonds. He closed his fingers around them, the first tangible connection to Alicia since the accident, bringing both comfort and renewed anguish. These were her favorite, he told Marcus that evening. She wore them at our wedding, said they reminded her to value simplicity even when surrounded by excess. Marcus nodded, his own grief etched deeply in his face. She never lost that perspective, even after marrying into such wealth. It's what made her special. The search pattern expanded methodically over the next 2 weeks. Sophisticated underwater drones scanned the lake floor in grid patterns. Helicopters surveyed every mile of shoreline, some extending far beyond what seemed possible for someone to have drifted or swum. Local residents joined the effort, combing beaches and inlets for any sign of the missing American woman. Robert rented every available room in the village's small luxury hotel, converting the lobby into a permanent command center. His wealth, which had always opened doors and solved problems throughout his life, now flowed without limit or hesitation for equipment, for personnel, for experts pulled from research facilities and naval units across Europe. Yet as a third week began with no sign of Alicia, even Robert's unlimited resources couldn't alter the growing consensus among search experts. The Swiss authorities approached him with compassionate directness. Mr. Howell, the police chief said, accompanied by the head of the regional search and rescue department, we have conducted one of the most extensive search operations in this region's history. Every available resource has been utilized, every possible scenario investigated. He paused delicately. It is time we acknowledge the statistical realities. The clinical terminology statistical realities struck Robert like a physical blow. Until this moment, official reports had maintained the possibility, however slim, that Alicia might be found alive. This subtle shift acknowledged what logic had been telling him for weeks, but his heart had refused to accept. "The search continues," Robert replied, his voice leaving no room for discussion. The officials exchanged glances before the chief spoke again. "Mr. Howell, we will continue to support your private efforts, but I must be honest, we are transitioning our official resources from rescue to recovery." The distinction was not lost on Robert. Recovery meant they were no longer looking for a living person. That night, after putting Zara to bed, Robert stood on his hotel balcony overlooking the lake. The moon cast a silvery path across the water that had taken Alicia from him, its beauty a cruel contrast to the devastation it had caused. "I will find you," he whispered into the darkness. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I will bring you home." As the search entered its fourth week, even Marcus began to gently suggest what Robert refused to consider, that it might be time to take Zara home, to begin the heartbreaking process of building a life without Alicia. "She needs stability, Robert," Marcus said, as they watched Zara playing with blocks under the nanny's supervision. "A familiar environment, her own things around her. We've been living in this hotel for nearly a month. If we leave, it's admitting—" "She's gone," Robert replied, the words physically painful to speak. Marcus placed a hand on his son-in-law's shoulder. "No, it's accepting that Zara needs us to be strong for her now. Alicia would want that." His voice broke slightly on his daughter's name. "She would want us to put Zara first, just as she did." The reminder of Alicia's final choice, her insistence that Robert save their daughter before herself, cut through his determined denial. For the first time since the accident, Robert allowed himself to consider what Alicia would want him to do now, faced with the increasingly undeniable reality that she was not coming back. On the morning marking 1 month since the yacht sank, Robert stood at the lakeshore for what he had finally accepted would be the last time. He had made arrangements for his jet to return them to New York the following day. The search would continue, funded by his foundation and managed by professionals, but he and Zara would no longer remain in Switzerland. "Mr. Howell." The hotel manager approached hesitantly. "There's a call for you from one of the remote villages to the north. A fisherman has come forward with information about the night of the storm." Robert's heart leapt with sudden, irrational hope. "Put it through to my suite immediately." The call, conducted through a translator since the elderly fisherman spoke, only a Swiss-German dialect, initially seemed promising. The man described seeing debris from the yacht wash up near his isolated cottage the night of the storm. "Ask him if he saw a woman," Robert interrupted, his knuckles white around the telephone receiver. The translator conveyed the question, then listened to the long reply before turning back to Robert. "He says, no, sir, just wreckage. Some pieces of wood, a life vest, some broken glass. He thought it might be helpful to know how far the debris traveled." The surge of hope collapsed as quickly as it had risen. "Thank him for the information," Robert said mechanically. "It will help the ongoing search efforts." That afternoon, Robert and Marcus visited the local church, where they participated in a small, private memorial service for Alicia. Though her body had not been recovered, both men recognized the need for some ritual of acknowledgement before leaving Switzerland. "I don't know how to say goodbye to her," Robert confessed, as they stood before the altar, where white lilies, Alicia's favorite, had been arranged. "We're not saying goodbye," Marcus replied. "Just acknowledging what happened here. She'll always be with us through Zara." That evening, as Robert packed their belongings for the journey home, he came across Alicia's small travel case that had been retrieved from the undamaged section of the yacht. Inside were her toiletries, a novel she had been reading, and a small, velvet pouch containing jewelry she hadn't been wearing at the time of the accident. Her wedding ring, a gold bracelet he had given her after Zara's birth, a locket containing a family photo. Robert sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the tangible reminders of his wife overwhelming his carefully maintained composure. For the first time since the accident, he allowed himself to weep openly, clutching these precious items to his chest as the full weight of his loss finally broke through the barriers of shock and denial. "I'm sorry," he whispered repeatedly. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." The next morning, with red-rimmed eyes but restored composure, Robert Howell boarded his private jet with Zara and Marcus. As the aircraft lifted off, he gazed down at Lake Lucerne, diminishing beneath them, this beautiful, deadly place that had forever altered the course of his life. What Robert couldn't know as his plane disappeared into the clouds was that in a tiny clinic in a remote alpine village, nearly 30 miles from the accident site, a woman lay unconscious. She had been found by a local fisherman, washed up on a rocky shore during the storm. With no identification and severe injuries, including head trauma, she had been registered simply as Jane Doe Lake Rescue. The woman's existence remained unknown to the massive search operation focused around the yacht's wreckage site. By the time Robert Howell returned to New York with his daughter, having spent his billions in a futile attempt to find his wife, Alicia Howell was already beginning the long, confused journey back to consciousness, with no memory of who she was or the desperate search being conducted for her across the lake. Chapter 5. Single Father. The Manhattan skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows as Robert Howell stood in his penthouse, a solitary figure against the panoramic view. 2 months had passed since the tragedy on Lake Lucerne, and the billionaire banker was learning the hardest role of his life, being both father and mother to his 1-year-old. "Daughter, she's finally asleep," Grace Howell said softly, joining her son. Robert's mother had moved into the penthouse immediately after the accident, putting her own active social life on hold to help her son navigate the uncharted waters of grief and single parenthood. Robert nodded, his reflection showing a man physically unchanged, yet fundamentally altered. Dark shadows beneath his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights spent replaying the moment he'd been forced to choose between saving his wife or daughter. "I've prepared the guest room for Marcus," Grace continued. "He arrives tomorrow." Alicia's father had remained in Switzerland for weeks after Robert and Zara's departure, overseeing the ongoing search and handling legal matters. The search, still funded by Robert's seemingly limitless resources, had yielded nothing beyond the few personal effects already recovered from the yacht. "I should review those nanny applications," Robert said, gesturing toward a folder on his desk. "I thought you were against hiring help," Grace reminded him. "I was. I am." He ran a hand through his hair. "But Zara deserves more than a father who's barely functioning." The truth was that despite his billions, Robert was struggling. The financial titan who controlled markets worldwide couldn't control his grief or the practical challenges of caring for a toddler. Yet his determination to be present for his daughter never wavered. "The board is pressing for your return," Grace mentioned cautiously. "Johnson has called 3 times this week. Howell Capital survived before me. It will survive without me, for a while longer." In the hierarchy of Robert's priorities, his banking empire had fallen dramatically, supplanted by the small, dark-haired child who now depended solely on him. The following day, Robert declined his driver's services and personally collected Marcus from the airport, Zara secured in her car seat. The reunion between grandfather and granddaughter brought the first genuine smile to Robert's face in weeks. "She's grown," Marcus observed as he buckled himself into the passenger seat of Robert's Bentley. "Children do that," Robert replied, then added more softly, I take pictures every day so Alicia won't miss how much—" He trailed off, the present tense, a painful reminder of his ongoing struggle to accept that Alicia would never see Zara grow up. Marcus placed a hand on his son-in-law's shoulder, the gesture conveying understanding without requiring words. The once antagonistic activist and the billionaire banker had found common ground in their shared loss and love for Zara. At the penthouse, after Zara was settled for her nap, the two men sat in Robert's study reviewing the practical matters Marcus had handled in Switzerland. "The Swiss authorities have issued the death certificate," Marcus said, handing over a folder of documents. "I've arranged for her personal effects to be shipped here. Most items from the yacht were damaged beyond recovery, but there are some things from the hotel suite." Robert accepted the folder without opening it. "Thank you for doing this. I couldn't have—" "You needed to be with Zara," Marcus finished for him. "No thanks necessary." They moved on to discussing the substantial insurance payout, meaningless to a man of Robert's wealth, but requiring decisions nonetheless. Without hesitation, Robert directed the entire sum to the establishment of a trust for arts education, programs in underserved communities, a cause Alicia had championed. "She would approve," Marcus said simply. As days turned to weeks, Robert gradually established new routines centered entirely around Zara. He adjusted his sleep schedule to match hers, learned to prepare simple meals she would eat, mastered the intricacies of bath time and bedtime stories. When she developed an ear infection, he stayed awake all night monitoring her fever, refusing to delegate even this difficult task to his mother. Grace watched her son's transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. The ruthless financial strategist who had built Howell Capital was now spending hours on the nursery floor, building block towers for his daughter to knock down. He had learned to braid hair by watching YouTube tutorials, determined that Zara should have the same pretty styles Alicia would have created. The board called again, Grace mentioned one evening, finding Robert in the kitchen preparing Zara's dinner himself, despite the chef's availability. "Johnson says they need your decision on the Singapore acquisition. Tell him to proceed according to the contingency plan we discussed in February," Robert replied, without looking up from the small portions of vegetables he was carefully arranging. "Zara, sweet peas are delicious. Watch Daddy eat one." Grace observed quietly as her powerful son made exaggerated expressions of delight over a pea, coaxing a giggle from his daughter. "You can't stay away from the office forever, Robert." "I'm not staying away forever, just until I'm certain Zara feels secure." He kissed the top of his daughter's head. "She's lost enough already." After 3 months, Robert had interviewed and rejected 17 potential nannies, finding fault with credentials that would have impressed most parents. In reality, no one could meet his impossible standard. No one could be Alicia. The breakthrough came when Marcus suggested a different approach. Instead of looking for someone to replace Alicia, which no one can do, find someone who brings their own strengths to Zara's life. This shift in perspective led Robert to hire Elena, a warm, grandmotherly woman whose own children were grown. She made no pretense at sophistication or special educational techniques, but offered genuine affection and a steady presence. With Eleanor handling some childcare duties, Robert tentatively began re-engaging with Howell Capital, though strictly on his own terms. He refused early meetings or late dinners, keeping bankers' hours for perhaps the first time in Wall Street history. "Mr. Howell has a standing departure time of 3 p.m., his assistant informed frustrated executives who tried to schedule late afternoon meetings. No exceptions. Every day at 3:15, Robert would arrive home to spend the remainder of the afternoon with Zara, taking her to the park himself rather than sending staff, reading her stories, overseeing her dinner and bath time. His presence was consistent and unwavering, When Zara's second birthday approached, Robert faced it with dread, knowing the date would forever be associated with the tragedy that followed her first birthday celebration. After much consideration, he arranged a small gathering in Central Park, just family and a few close friends, with a simple cake and balloons. Alicia would have done something like this, he told Marcus as they watched Zara delightedly reaching for colorful balloons. She always thought experiences meant more than extravagance. She'd be proud of you, Marcus replied, watching his granddaughter with mingled joy and sadness. The way you've put Zara first, the father you've become. As the seasons changed, Robert remained steadfast in his devotion to his daughter. When her preschool class needed parent volunteers, the billionaire banker rearranged board meetings to spend mornings helping 4-year-olds with art projects. When she needed a costume for her first dance recital, he stayed up all night learning to sew rather than purchasing one or delegating the task. Through it all, Robert ensured that Alicia remained a presence in their home. He spoke of her daily to Zara, sharing stories of her mother's compassion, intelligence, and humor. Photographs of Alicia adorned every room, and on her birthday each year, they released paper lanterns into the night sky. A ritual Zara came to treasure without fully understanding its significance. "Is Mummy in heaven?" Zara asked when she was 5, studying a photograph of Alicia with solemn eyes. Robert knelt beside her, choosing his words carefully. "Mommy loved you very much. There was a storm, and she made sure you were safe before anything else. That's how brave and loving she was. Do you miss her?" "Every day," Robert answered honestly. "But I have you, and you have so much of her in you. Her smile, her kindness, the way you stand up for what's right." As Zara grew, Robert faced the unique challenges of raising a daughter amid immense privilege. While other wealthy parents threw extravagant birthday parties featuring celebrity entertainers, Robert created meaningful celebrations focused on experiences and giving back. When classmates at her exclusive private school arrived in designer clothes, he taught Zara that value wasn't determined by price tags. His greatest teaching tool became the Alicia Renee Foundation, established in his wife's memory. He involved Zara in age-appropriate foundation decisions, showing her how wealth could create opportunity for others less fortunate. By the time she was 8, Zara was helping select which children's arts programs would receive funding, developing her mother's compassionate perspective despite growing up in a world of enormous privilege. Throughout these years, Grace occasionally suggested Robert consider dating again, introducing him to sophisticated, accomplished women from their social circle. Each time, Robert politely declined, unable to imagine opening his heart to anyone after Alicia. "You're still young," Grace would remind him. "Barely 40. Alicia wouldn't want you to spend decades alone." "I'm not alone," Robert would reply, his gaze shifting to wherever Zara was. "I have everything I need." In truth, the successful banker who could acquire anything money could buy had discovered what truly mattered couldn't be purchased at any price. The joy of watching his daughter grow, of honoring Alicia's memory through his parenting, of building a life that balanced privilege with purpose. The hollowed man who had returned from Switzerland had gradually rebuilt himself around a singular focus, being the father Zara needed, a father worthy of Alicia's sacrifice. Chapter 6. Years pass. "Daddy, can you French braid my hair like in the picture?" Zara held up a magazine clipping, her expression earnest. At 11 years old, she was a striking blend of both parents. Alicia's warm brown eyes and Robert's determined jaw, her mother's compassion and her father's quiet strength. Robert studied the complex hairstyle with apprehension, but nodded. "Let me watch a tutorial first." 10 minutes and 3 YouTube videos later, Robert carefully worked on his daughter's dark hair, his fingers now practiced at this task that once would have seemed impossible. 10 years of being both mother and father had taught him skills he never imagined needing, from hair braiding to heart-to-heart talks about female friendships. "Perfect for your recital," he declared when finished, turning her toward the mirror. Zara examined his work critically, then smiled. "It's good. Mom would be impressed." The casual reference to Alicia no longer caused the sharp pain it once did. Over the years, she had become an ever-present spirit in their home, not a subject to avoid, but a beloved memory to honor. Robert had made certain that Zara knew her mother through photographs, stories, and the traditions he maintained. After dropping Zara at school, Robert headed to his office in Midtown. Though he had eventually returned to work at Howell Capital, his priorities had shifted dramatically. He delegated extensively, attended only essential meetings, and left promptly at 3 each day to be there when Zara returned from school. His colleagues had long since stopped questioning this arrangement. Robert Howell's dedication to his daughter was legendary, as was his continued devotion to his lost wife. "The Tokyo portfolio numbers look strong," his assistant noted, handing him a folder as he passed. "And Mrs. Whitmore called again about the charity gala next month." Robert sighed. Eleanor Whitmore, a widow who sat on several of the same charitable boards, had been not so subtly pursuing him for the past year. "Tell her I'll consider it but make no commitments." This was a familiar dance. As a wealthy, attractive widower, Robert had become an irresistible target for Manhattan's elite matchmakers. Despite consistent disinterest on his part, the parade of introductions continued. Elegant divorcees seated beside him at dinner parties, accomplished professionals who accidentally encountered him at gallery openings, even one bold widow who had appeared at his door with theater tickets and a suggestion that our children could keep each other company. Robert remained unfailingly polite, but unmistakably distant. Though he occasionally attended social functions when necessary for business or Zara's school, he never brought a date, never lingered for drinks afterward, and never gave any indication that his heart was available. One of the unexpected developments of the past decade had been his deepening relationship with Marcus Renee. United in grief and in love for Zara, the two men had forged a genuine friendship. The Alicia Renee Foundation, established by Robert to provide arts education to underprivileged children, had given them a shared purpose beyond family ties. That evening, after Zara's violin recital, they celebrated with ice cream at her favorite parlor. As she chatted animatedly about the performance, Robert found himself studying her face, cataloging the features that came from Alicia. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Zara asked, licking chocolate from her spoon. "Just thinking how much." "You remind me of your mom," Robert admitted. She had that same little crinkle between her eyebrows when she was concentrating on her music. Zara's expression turned thoughtful. "Do you think you'll ever fall in love again, Dad?" The question caught him off guard. "Where did that come from?" She shrugged. "Emma's dad got remarried last year, and Grandma Grace keeps introducing you to ladies at our Christmas parties." Robert considered his response carefully. "I had a kind of love with your mother that doesn't come along twice in a lifetime," he finally said. "Some people are lucky enough to find that once. I don't expect to find it again." "But don't you get lonely?" Zara persisted, her perception uncomfortably acute. "I have you," Robert replied simply, "and that's more than enough for me." Later that night, after Zara was asleep, Robert sat in his study reviewing foundation documents. A framed photograph of Alicia stood on his desk, not her formal portrait, but a candid shot taken at the beach, her face alight with laughter as wind tossed her hair. He often found his eyes drawn to it during late-night work sessions, a habit that comforted rather than pained him now. "The foundation's expanding to 3 new schools this year," he told the photograph. "Marcus is pushing for 5, but I think We should ensure quality before quantity. He smiled slightly. He's still as passionate as ever, your father, and still trying to save the world one community at a time. These one-sided conversations had evolved over the years. What began as grief-stricken confessions had transformed into comfortable updates, like checking in with an absent partner. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, Robert could almost imagine Alicia's responses. A week later, Robert faced one of the more challenging aspects of raising a daughter alone when Zara came home from school in tears. "What happened?" he asked, immediately setting aside the contracts he'd been reviewing. "It's stupid," Zara muttered, dropping her backpack on the floor. "Not if it made you cry," Robert countered gently. After some coaxing, the story emerged. A group of girls planning a weekend shopping trip for dresses for the upcoming school dance, pointedly excluding Zara with whispered comments about her not having a mum to help her shop anyway. Robert felt a familiar ache in his chest, the grief of all the moments Alicia had missed, all the experiences Zara would never share with her mother. But years of practice had taught him to channel that grief into action. "Get your coat," he said decisively. "Why?" Zara asked, wiping her eyes. "Because we're going shopping," Robert declared. "And we're going to find you a dress that will make those girls wish their mothers had your father's excellent taste." Zara's reluctant smile was reward enough for the 4 hours that followed, a marathon of department stores and boutiques that tested Robert's patience, but ultimately yielded a dress that made Zara's eyes light up when she emerged from the dressing room. "Mom would love this one," she said confidently, twirling in front of the mirror. Robert swallowed the lump in his throat. Yes, she would. These moments, the bittersweet blend of pride and loss, had become familiar territory over the years. For Zara's first day of kindergarten, Robert had carefully selected her outfit, packed her lunch with a heart-shaped note inside, and taken dozens of photos, all while acutely aware of Alicia's absence. For her first lost tooth, he had played tooth fairy, leaving a small pearl necklace that had once belonged to Alicia under her pillow. Each milestone was simultaneously a celebration and a reminder of what had been lost. Yet Robert had learned to find joy in these moments rather than dwelling on the absence at their center. As the years passed, Grace continued her gentle campaign for Robert to consider dating again. Though now in her 70s, she maintained an active social life and worried about her son's solitary existence. "Darling, the Morgans are having a dinner party next weekend," she mentioned casually over Sunday brunch. "Janet's niece will be there, the one who just moved back from Paris. Lovely girl, curator at the Met." "I have plans with Zara that weekend," Robert replied, his standard excuse for declining such invitations. Grace sighed. "You always have plans with Zara. I adore my granddaughter, but even she thinks you should get out more." "Zara said that?" Robert asked, surprised. "Not in so many words," Grace admitted. "But she told me she worries about you being alone when she goes to college." Robert smiled. "That's 6 years away. I think I can manage until then." The truth was that Robert had built a life that felt complete despite, or perhaps because of, its singular focus on Zara and the foundation that bore Alicia's name. Where once he had derived satisfaction from financial conquests and corporate acquisitions, he now found meaning in his daughter's accomplishments and the opportunities the foundation created for children who lacked Zara's privileges. If, sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, he reached across the bed for a warmth that wasn't there, or found himself wondering what Alicia would look like now, with a decade's worth of laughter lines around her eyes, well, these were private moments he shared with no one. His world had narrowed in some ways after Alicia's death, but it had also deepened immeasurably. The billionaire banker who had once viewed life through the lens of profit and loss now saw it through the eyes of his daughter, with wonder, compassion, and an appreciation for what truly mattered. What Robert couldn't know, as he maintained, This carefully constructed life centered around Zara and Alicia's memory was that across an ocean and against all odds, the woman he had mourned for a decade was slowly, painfully finding her way back to them. Chapter 7. The Missing Years. 10 years had passed since the tragedy on Lake Lucerne. Zara had grown from the terrified infant Robert had rescued into a thoughtful 11-year-old who excelled at her exclusive private school and showed remarkable compassion for someone raised amid immense privilege. Robert had built a carefully structured life centered around his daughter and his expanding business empire. Howell Capital now managed over $50 billion in assets, cementing Robert's position among America's wealthiest men. Yet for all his success, he remained the widower who had never remarried, the billionaire who still wore his wedding ring, the father who spoke of his late wife to their daughter every night before bed. Despite Grace's continued efforts to introduce him to suitable women, Robert remained devoted to Alicia's memory, unable to imagine giving his heart to anyone else. What Robert and Zara didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that Alicia Howell was alive. The morning after the storm, as Robert began his desperate search operation on Lake Lucerne, a small fishing boat bobbed in the waters of a remote northern inlet, nearly 30 miles from the accident site. Anton Berge, a reclusive elderly fisherman who lived off the grid in a tiny alpine village, was checking his nets when he spotted something unusual washed up on the rocky shore near his cabin. At first, he thought it was debris from a boat, perhaps a bundle of clothing, but as he drew closer, he realized with shock that it was a woman, battered and barely breathing, but somehow still alive. With strength belying his 70 years, Anton carried the unconscious woman to his modest cabin and laid her on his own bed. The nearest hospital was hours away, and he had no telephone. Making a difficult decision, he used his limited medical knowledge from his years as a mountain guide to stabilize her as best he could, wrapping her in warm blankets, treating her visible wounds with homemade salves, and carefully feeding her broth when she briefly surfaced from unconsciousness. For nearly a week, Alicia hovered between life and death, her body broken by the violence of the storm and her near drowning. Multiple fractures, internal injuries, and a severe blow to her had made her survival improbable. Yet something within her refused to surrender, some stubborn spark of life that persisted despite the overwhelming odds. When her fever finally broke, Anton managed to flag down a passing tourist boat and convince them to take the still unconscious woman to the nearest medical facility. The small clinic in Valsertal was ill-equipped for trauma cases, but the dedicated staff stabilized her enough for transfer to a larger hospital in Lucerne. By the time Alicia reached proper medical care, Robert had already returned to America with Zara, the official search having transitioned from rescue to recovery. Without identification and wearing only a simple sundress when found, Alicia became simply Jane Doe Lake Rescue in the hospital records. When she finally regained consciousness after 2 months in a coma, the doctors discovered the true extent of her injuries, not just the physical trauma, but severe retrograde amnesia and aphasia resulting from her head injury. She could form only simple sentences, recognizing basic objects, but unable to recall her own name, nationality, or any personal details. "Can you tell us who you are?" a gentle nurse asked during those early days. "I not know," Alicia responded, frustration evident in her eyes. Head hurts, words hard. The only clues to her identity were fragments that emerged in her dreams. A name she sometimes called out in her sleep, Robert, and occasionally with great distress, Zara, but without context these names meant nothing to her doctors. They had no way of connecting this nameless woman to the high-profile search for a billionaire banker's wife that had concluded months earlier, especially given the significant distance between the accident site and where she had been found. For 2 years, Alicia remained in various Swiss medical facilities, slowly relearning how to walk, to form complete sentences, to perform basic self-care. The aphasia improved with intensive therapy, though she still struggled with complex language. The amnesia proved more persistent. Her procedural memory returned, allowing her to relearn skills, but her episodic memory remained frustratingly blank. In her third year, a breakthrough occurred. During an occupational therapy session, she was shown pictures of major cities to stimulate memory. "This is New York," the therapist said, showing her the distinctive skyline. Alicia stared at the image, her hands suddenly trembling. "Home," she whispered. "I think home." It wasn't much, but it was a start. The medical team contacted American authorities, but without a name, identification documents, or specific details, little progress was made. She was eventually transferred to a refugee assistance program designed to help undocumented individuals establish legal status. "We need to call you something," the social worker assigned to her case said kindly. "Would you like to choose a name?" The woman thought carefully before answering. "Alicia," she said with unexpected certainty, though she couldn't explain why. This name felt right. For the next 7 years, Alicia navigated a bureaucratic nightmare of refugee centers, temporary housing, and endless paperwork. She worked whatever jobs her uncertain status allowed: dishwasher, hotel cleaner, farm laborer, saving every franc toward her goal of reaching America, the place she somehow knew was home. During these years, her memory returned in unpredictable fragments. A child's laughter might trigger the image of a little girl with dark curls. The scent of a particular cologne could bring tears to her eyes without explanation. Sometimes at night, she dreamed of being held by a man whose face remained just out of focus, his touch so familiar it left her aching upon waking. In her 6th year in Switzerland, while cleaning rooms at a small tourist hotel, Alicia found a discarded business magazine. She was about to throw it away when a photograph caught her attention. A handsome man in an expensive suit, identified in the caption as Robert Howell, CEO of Howell Capital, at the opening of the Alicia Renee Foundation's newest arts center. The magazine slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers as memories crashed through the barriers in her mind. Her wedding day, Zara's birth, the yacht on Lake Lucerne, Robert's anguished face as water rushed into the cabin. "Robert," she whispered, touching the photograph with trembling fingers, "my husband." With this breakthrough, her recovery accelerated. She took the magazine to her social worker, explaining with new clarity who she was and what had happened. Though initially skeptical, the woman helped initiate a more targeted investigation, contacting the American embassy with specific information that could be verified. The process was agonizingly slow. Without official documentation, establishing her identity required extensive evidence: DNA testing, fingerprint analysis, detailed knowledge of Robert Howell's private life that couldn't be gleaned from public sources. Each step forward seemed to be followed by 2 steps back as bureaucratic requirements multiplied. "I need to call him," Alicia pleaded repeatedly. "Just let me speak to my husband." "We can't," the embassy official explained gently. "Not until we're certain. Imagine what it would do to him, to your daughter, if we raised hopes only to be wrong." Finally, after nearly a year of investigation, the American embassy confirmed key aspects of her story through discreet inquiries that didn't alert Robert to the possibility of her survival. Her DNA showed clear maternal markers matching Zara's. Medical records accessed through official channels. Her fingerprints, though not in any criminal database, matched partial prints found on personal items preserved in Robert's New York penthouse. "Mrs. Howell," the embassy official said formally during their final meeting, "we've confirmed your identity. We'll be issuing emergency travel documents to allow you to return to the United States." 10 years after being torn from her family by the storm, Alicia was going home. The embassy arranged basic transportation, a commercial flight to New York with a humanitarian escort to help navigate immigration procedures given her unusual circumstances. They offered to contact Robert directly, but Alicia refused. "I need to see him myself," she insisted, "to explain in person." Upon landing in New York, Alicia faced the crushing realization that her decade-long struggle was not quite over. She had the address of their Manhattan penthouse, but discovered upon arrival that the doorman had no record of the family being in residence. "Mr. Howell and Miss Zara are at the Hamptons estate, ma'am," he explained, eyeing her simple clothes. With barely concealed suspicion, "They've been there preparing for the wedding." "Wedding?" Alicia repeated, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. The doorman, warming slightly to her obvious distress, nodded toward a newspaper on his desk. "It's been in all the society pages. Mr. Howell is hosting a very exclusive wedding this weekend at the estate." With shaking hands, Alicia picked up the paper and found the article. "Billionaire widower Robert Howell to wed Vanessa Hamilton in Hampton's ceremony." The photograph showed Robert, still handsome though, with strands of silver at his temples, standing beside an elegant blonde woman outside the Metropolitan Opera. Alicia's heart seemed to stop in her chest. After 10 years of fighting to return, to him she had arrived just days before he married another woman. The cruel timing seemed like a cosmic joke after everything she had endured. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the doorman asked, noticing her pallor. Gathering her composure, Alicia thanked him and stepped back onto the street. She had exactly $47.82 to her name, all that remained after the embassy's basic expenses stipend. The Hamptons were hours away, but somehow she had to get there before Saturday. With determination born from a decade of survival against impossible odds, Alicia counted her meager funds and headed toward the bus station. She had crossed continents, battled bureaucracies, and fought her way back from the edge of death. A few more hours and a few more miles wouldn't stop her now, not when she was so close to reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. Iki. Long bus ride to the Hamptons gave Alicia time to absorb the shock of discovering Robert was about to remarry. After 10 years, she could hardly blame him. He had believed her dead, had mourned her, had raised their daughter alone. According to the article, Vanessa Hamilton came from a wealthy banking family herself, someone who would understand Robert's world and responsibilities. Still, the thought of him with another woman created a physical ache in Alicia's chest. The bonds between them had been strong enough to survive her amnesia. Even without knowing his name, she had dreamed of his touch for years. Was it possible his love for her had endured as well, beneath the new relationship he was about to formalize? As the bus rolled through wealthy Long Island communities, Alicia's anxiety grew. What if Robert didn't believe her? What if Zara, who had been just a baby when Alicia disappeared, rejected this stranger claiming to be her mother? What if she was too late and Robert had truly moved on? No, she couldn't allow these doubts to overwhelm her now, not after everything she had endured to reach this moment. Whatever happened when she arrived at the Hamptons estate, Alicia was determined to face it with the same courage that had sustained her through a decade of struggle. The bus finally reached its destination. In East Hampton late that evening, with her remaining dollars, Alicia secured a room at a modest motel for the night. Tomorrow would be Friday, one day before the wedding, according to the newspaper article. One day to find her way to Robert's estate and somehow reclaim the life and love that had been torn from her by the storm on Lake Lucerne 10 years ago. Chapter 8. A Mother's Wish. The steady beep of medical equipment provided a somber rhythm to the otherwise silent penthouse bedroom that had been converted into a state-of-the-art medical suite. Grace Howell, once the epitome of elegant vitality, now lay frail against the satin pillows, her aristocratic features sharpened by illness. "Robert," she whispered, raising a hand that seemed suddenly too thin, too fragile to belong to the woman who had managed Robert's household with unwavering strength since Alicia's death. Robert took his mother's hand, noting with alarm how cold her fingers felt despite the carefully regulated temperature of the room. "I'm here, Mother. The doctor says you should rest." Grace's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. "We both know what the doctor really thinks, my dear. There's no need to pretend." The diagnosis had come 3 weeks earlier, advanced heart disease requiring immediate intervention. Despite Robert securing the world's best cardiologists and sparing no expense on treatments, Grace's condition had deteriorated with alarming speed. What began as occasional shortness of breath had rapidly progressed to cardiac episodes that left her increasingly weakened. "Have they taken Zara to school?" Grace asked, her voice stronger when speaking of her granddaughter. "Yes, but she wanted to stay home with you. She's worried." Grace's expression softened. "Such a thoughtful child, so much like her mother." She paused, gathering strength before continuing. "Which is what I wanted to speak with you about, Robert." Robert tensed slightly, recognizing the tone his mother used when broaching a subject she knew he wouldn't welcome. "Mother—" "No, let me finish," Grace interrupted with surprising firmness. "I don't have the luxury of time for polite evasions anymore." Her grip on his hand tightened. "My greatest regret, watching you these past 10 years, has been seeing you close yourself off from life, from love." Robert sighed, a conversation they had had many times before. "I haven't closed myself off. I have Zara, the foundation, my work." "You exist, Robert, you don't live." Grace's gaze was unflinching despite her physical weakness. "You've built a life around Zara and your business, and you've done an admirable job with both. But you're still a young man, barely 40. You have decades ahead of you." "I'm fulfilled by what I have," Robert insisted. "Not everyone needs romantic love to be complete." Grace studied him with the insight born from a lifetime of knowing him. "Perhaps not, but you do, Robert, you always have. Even as a boy, you loved deeply and completely. Your father, your friends, your first serious girlfriend in college." Her expression gentled. "And then Alicia, who brought out the best in you, who taught you what real partnership could be." The mention of Alicia's name still had the power to tighten Robert's chest, even after a decade. "No one could replace her, Mother." "I'm not asking you to replace her," Grace countered. "I'm asking you to honor what she gave you by finding the courage to love again. To give Zara a complete family, yes, but more importantly, to give yourself permission to experience that connection that makes life worth living." A monitor beeped more insistently, signaling Grace's rising heart rate. The private nurse stepped in from the adjoining room, checking readings with professional efficiency. "Mrs. Howell needs to rest now, Mr. Howell," she said with gentle authority. Robert nodded, rising to leave, but Grace caught his sleeve with surprising strength. "Promise me," she whispered urgently, "promise me you'll at least try." Looking into his mother's eyes, seeing the genuine concern there, Robert found he couldn't refuse her. "I promise to try, Mother. Now please, rest." For the next 2 weeks, Grace rallied slightly, giving Robert hope that perhaps the specialists had been overly pessimistic in their prognosis. But on a rainy Tuesday morning, she suffered a major cardiac event that left her significantly weakened and confirmed the doctor's worst fears. "We've done everything medically possible, Mr. Howell," the chief cardiologist explained privately. "At this point, it's about making her comfortable and addressing any unfinished business she might have." The clinical assessment hit Robert with unexpected force. Despite his wealth and power, there were still battles he couldn't win, forces he couldn't control with his billions. The helplessness he felt echoed painfully back to that day on Lake Lucerne, watching the yacht section containing Alicia disappear beneath the water. That evening, after Zara had been gently convinced to go to her room with a promise that she could see her grandmother first thing in the morning, Robert sat alone with Grace. The room was dimly lit, medical equipment casting ghostly shadows on the walls. "You're brooding," Grace observed, her voice weaker but her perception still acute. "Just thinking," Robert corrected gently. "About your promise to me?" Grace's lips curved in a knowing smile. "I may be dying, but I haven't forgotten." Robert sighed, taking his mother's frail hand. "I've been thinking about it, yes. But Mother, finding someone who understands our world, who would be good for Zara, who I could genuinely care for, it's not simple." "What about Vanessa Hamilton?" Grace suggested. "Janet's daughter. She's recently returned from London. Some important position with an international bank. Lovely girl, intelligent, comes from a good family." "Mother, are you really matchmaking from your deathbed?" Robert asked, unable to suppress a small smile despite the gravity of the situation. "If not now, when?" Grace retorted with a flash of her old spirit. "Besides, Vanessa understands the responsibilities that come with wealth. She's philanthropic, cultured, and from what Janet tells me, quite attractive in that understated way you always preferred." Robert shook his head, amazed at his mother's tenacity. "You've clearly given this considerable thought." "I've had little else to occupy me lately," Grace replied, her expression sobered as she studied his face. "Robert, your wealth brings responsibility, not just to your shareholders or to the charitable causes you support, but to yourself and to Zara. That child needs more than a devoted father, brilliant as you are at that role. She needs to see you fully engaged with life, with all its possibilities." The monitor beside the bed beeped a warning as Grace's heartbeat became slightly irregular. She closed her eyes briefly, concentrating on her breathing as the medications worked to stabilize her rhythm. "You don't have to decide anything now," she continued when she could speak again. "Just meet Vanessa, have dinner, see if there's any potential there." Robert looked at his mother, the woman who had been his rock since Alicia's death, who had moved into his penthouse without hesitation to help raise Zara, who had never once complained about setting aside her own active social life to support his single parenthood. How could he deny her this simple request when she had given him so much? "All right," he conceded. "I'll meet with Vanessa, but I'm making no promises beyond that." Grace's smile was triumphant despite her weakness. "That's all I ask. Just open the door a crack, Robert. Life has a way of flowing through even the smallest openings." 3 days later, Grace Howell passed away peacefully in her sleep, her hand held by her son and granddaughter. The private funeral was attended by New York's elite, politicians, business leaders, philanthropists who had worked with Grace on numerous charitable boards. Robert stood stoic throughout, his arm protectively around Zara's shoulders as they accepted condolences. Among the mourners was an elegant woman in her late 30s who approached them near the end of the service. "Mr. Howell," she said, her voice low and cultured, "I'm Vanessa Hamilton. I was so very fond of your mother. She was a remarkable woman." Robert appraised her with the automatic assessment he applied to business associates. Intelligent eyes, composed demeanor, quiet confidence that spoke of old money and excellent education. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Hamilton. My mother spoke highly of you as well. She mentioned me." Vanessa seemed genuinely surprised. Robert's lips curved in a small, sad smile. "My mother was nothing if not strategic, even at the end." Understanding dawned in Vanessa's eyes, followed by a flash of embarrassment. "Ah, I see. Perhaps we could have dinner sometime," Robert suggested, fulfilling his promise to Grace even as he felt a pang of disloyalty to Alicia's memory. After a suitable period, of course. I'd like that, Vanessa replied simply. As she moved away to speak with other mourners, Robert found himself watching her with a detached curiosity. She was undeniably the type of woman who would fit seamlessly into his world. Sophisticated, discreet, clearly intelligent. The type of woman who would understand the demands of his position and the responsibilities of his wealth. The type of woman Grace would have approved of. Yet there was no spark, no electric connection like he had felt the first time he saw Alicia across a crowded museum gala. No quickening of his pulse or shortness of breath that signaled attraction beyond the rational assessment of compatibility. "Dad!" Zara's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Can we go home now?" Robert looked down at his daughter, 11 years old, and already showing the emotional intelligence that had been Alicia's hallmark. "Yes, sweetheart, we can go home." As their car pulled away from the cemetery, Robert gazed out at the grey Manhattan skyline. He had promised his mother he would try to open his heart again, and he would honor that promise. But as he thought of Vanessa Hamilton and the careful, controlled relationship they might build, he couldn't help wondering if settling for companionship, without passion, was truly what Grace had wanted for him, or if she had hoped for something more, something that might rekindle the light that had gone out of his eyes when Alicia disappeared beneath the waters of Lake Lucerne. Chapter 9. Reluctant Proposals. The flawless diamond ring glittered under the subdued lighting of Le Bernardin as Robert presented it to Vanessa Hamilton. 5 carats, emerald cut, set in platinum with baguette accents. A ring befitting the future wife of one of America's wealthiest men. "Vanessa, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The words came out perfectly rehearsed, as if he were proposing a business merger rather than a marriage. Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand extended toward him, her expression composed and pleased, but lacking the radiance of a woman truly in love. "Yes, Robert, I would be delighted." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Robert felt a vague emptiness where excitement should have been. It had been 3 months since his mother's death, and true to his promise, he had begun seeing Vanessa Hamilton. Their courtship had progressed with the careful precision he applied to all aspects of his life. Elegant dinners at exclusive restaurants, attendance at the right cultural events, thoughtful gifts selected with the help of his assistant. Vanessa was by any objective measure the perfect candidate for his second wife. The daughter of a banking family whose wealth, while not rivaling Robert's billions, was nevertheless substantial, she understood the unique responsibilities that came with significant fortune. Her work in international finance meant she could converse intelligently about Robert's business interests. Her refined taste and social connections would make her an asset at the charity events and business functions that were an inevitable part of his position. Most importantly, she had been kind to Zara during their carefully orchestrated interactions, respectful of the girl's feelings and never attempting to force a relationship. "We should consider a June wedding," Vanessa suggested as they sipped champagne to celebrate their engagement. "Perhaps at your Hamptons estate. The gardens will be lovely then." Robert nodded, allowing her to take control of the planning, exactly as he had anticipated she would. "Whatever you think best." In the weeks that followed, their engagement was announced in the society pages, and planning for the wedding proceeded with efficient luxury. Robert hired the most exclusive event coordinator in New York, who transformed his Hamptons estate into a showcase for wealth and taste. No expense was spared, rare flowers flown in from 3 continents, vintage champagne imported directly from France. Michelin-starred chefs competing for the catering contract. Though he signed off on every expenditure without hesitation, Robert remained strangely detached from the process. He attended tastings without offering opinions, reviewed seating charts without comment, and delegated most decisions to Vanessa and the coordinator. "Dad, do I have to wear this dress?" Zara asked during a fitting, frowning at her reflection in the mirror. At 11, she was developing a strong sense of her own style, one that clashed with Vanessa's vision of perfectly coordinated wedding aesthetics. Vanessa selected it specially, Robert replied diplomatically. It matches the wedding colors. Zara's expression remained troubled. But does it have to be her colors? It's going to be our family. The innocent question struck a nerve Robert hadn't realized was exposed. Would it be their family? Could anyone ever truly replace Alicia in their lives? Try to be patient with Vanessa, he told his daughter. She's doing her best to create something beautiful for all of us. But as the wedding approached, Robert found himself increasingly withdrawn from the preparations, approving expenses without interest and attending tastings without offering opinions. He told himself it was simply allowing Vanessa her moment, but in quiet moments he recognized the truth. His heart remained elsewhere, with a woman he had lost a decade ago. 2 nights before the wedding, as guests began arriving at the estate. For pre-wedding festivities, Robert escaped to his study under the pretense of handling an urgent business matter. In reality, he simply needed space away from the cheerful voices and congratulatory toasts that felt increasingly hollow. He was pouring himself a whiskey when Zara appeared in the doorway, still awake despite the late hour. "Dad," she said, padding across the room in her pajamas, "can I ask you something important?" "Of course, sweetheart." Robert set aside his drink and made space for her on the leather sofa. "What's on your mind?" Zara sat beside him, her expression unusually serious for a child her age. "Do you really love Vanessa? Like you loved Mom?" The direct question, delivered with a child's unerring instinct for truth, caught Robert off guard. His immediate instinct was to offer reassurance, to provide the answer that would make his daughter feel secure about the coming changes. Instead, he found himself reaching for the silver-framed photograph he still kept on his desk. Alicia laughing. On their honeymoon, her face alight with joy. "No," he admitted quietly, his gaze fixed on Alicia's image. "What I felt for your mother was different." "Then why are you marrying Vanessa?" Zara pressed, her dark eyes, so like Alicia's, searching his face. Robert sighed, struggling to articulate feelings he had barely acknowledged to himself. "Before Grandma died, she made me promise to try to find happiness again, to give you a complete family." He set the photograph down carefully. "Vanessa is a good person. She'll be a good partner, and she cares about you. But you still love." "Mum," Zara said. It wasn't a question but a statement of fact. A lump formed in Robert's throat as he nodded. "I'll always love your mother, Zara. That doesn't change, ever." His daughter leaned against him, quiet for a long moment. "I don't think you should marry someone you don't love like that," she finally said. "I don't need another mum. I just need you to be happy." The wisdom in her simple words struck Robert with unexpected force. Was he making a terrible mistake? But he had given his word. To his mother, to Vanessa, to the hundreds of guests already arriving at the estate. The momentum of the elaborate wedding plans seemed unstoppable, carrying him toward a future he had agreed to but didn't truly desire. "It's complicated, sweetheart," was all he could manage to say, kissing the top of Zara's head. "Now, off to bed. Tomorrow will be a busy day." After Zara left, Robert remained in his study, the whiskey untouched beside him. He opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small velvet pouch, the one containing Alicia's wedding and engagement rings, recovered from the sunken yacht and preserved all these years. "Am I doing the right thing?" he asked the empty room, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, he could almost imagine Alicia's response, her gentle wisdom, her unfailing ability to see to the heart of any situation. The night before the wedding, Robert found sleep elusive. He stood on the balcony of his bedroom, gazing at the stars above the meticulously manicured grounds of his Hamptons estate. Workers moved quietly through the gardens below, making final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony, arranging chairs, adjusting lighting, ensuring everything would be perfect for what society publications were already calling the wedding of the season. "I'm sorry, Alicia," he whispered to the night sky. "I don't know if this is what you would want for me, for us, but I'm trying to move forward, as Mother asked." For a moment, the gentle ocean breeze almost felt like a caress against his cheek, and Robert closed his eyes, allowing himself one final night of memories before he took this irrevocable step into a new chapter of his life. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in a run-down bus station, Alicia Howell counted the last of her meager funds. The journey from the embassy in Switzerland to New York had depleted most of the emergency stipend they had provided, leaving her with barely enough for one final leg of her journey. "One way to East Hampton, please," she told the ticket agent, pushing forward the carefully counted bills. "The earliest bus possible. That'll be the 5:45 a.m., the agent replied, eyeing her simple clothes with mild curiosity. Not much out there this time of year except for those fancy weddings. Alicia's heart constricted at the casual comment. "Yes," she managed. "A wedding." After purchasing her ticket, she found a corner of the bus station where she could wait through the night. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable, but after years in refugee centers and worker dormitories, she had endured far worse. She pulled from her bag the newspaper clipping that had sustained her through the final bureaucratic hurdles, the society page announcement of Robert's engagement to Vanessa Hamilton. The photograph showed him looking distinguished and successful, silver threading his dark hair at the temples, his arm around an elegant blonde woman. They made a handsome couple, perfectly matched in their sophistication and poise. The type of woman who would fit seamlessly into the world of wealth and privilege that Robert inhabited. For the first time since beginning her long journey home, Alicia felt a wave of doubt. What if he was truly happy with this woman? What right did she have to disrupt the life he had built in her absence? Perhaps showing up at the wedding would only cause pain and confusion for everyone, especially Zara, who would have no memory of her mother. Yet beneath these doubts burned a certainty that had sustained her through 10 years of struggle. She and Robert belonged together. The connection they shared transcended time and distance, logic and convenience. If there was even a chance he still loved her as she loved him, she had to try. Settling back against the hard seat, Alicia closed her eyes. In a few hours she would board a bus that would take her the final distance, and then, after a decade of separation, she would see her husband again, on the day he planned to marry another woman. Chapter 10. Reunited. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect at the Hamptons estate. An army of staff made final preparations as guests began to arrive, greeted by attendants who directed them to the magnificently decorated garden where the ceremony would take place. White roses and lilies created a fragrant pathway to the altar, where a string quartet played softly. In his dressing room, Robert adjusted his bow tie with practiced precision. The face that looked back at him from the mirror appeared composed, but revealed nothing of the turmoil within. Last night's conversation with Zara had left him restless, questioning a decision that had seemed inevitable after his mother's death. "You look very handsome," Marcus Renee commented from the doorway. In the decades since Alicia's death, Robert's relationship with his father-in-law had evolved from initial hostility to genuine respect and affection. Now, in his 70s, Marcus had become a beloved grandfather to Zara and a trusted advisor. To Robert, particularly in matters concerning the foundation established in Alicia's name. "Thank you for being here," Robert said sincerely. "It means a lot to Zara and to me." Marcus studied him with the penetrating gaze that had once intimidated corporate executives and politicians alike. "Are you sure about this, Robert? Marriage should be about more than convenience and social expectation." Robert sighed, unsurprised that Marcus had seen through the careful facade he maintained for others. "I gave my word to Vanessa, to my mother, before she died." "You gave your word to my daughter once too," Marcus observed quietly, "to love her until death parted you." "And I kept that promise," Robert replied, his voice rough with emotion. "For 10 years, I've kept it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, you have, and I couldn't have asked for a better husband for Alicia or father for Zara." He placed a gentle hand on Robert's shoulder. "Which is why I want you to be certain this is what you truly want." Before Robert could respond, his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Howell, it's time. The guests are seated and Miss Hamilton is ready." With a final glance at the mirror, Robert squared his shoulders and followed his assistant toward the garden, Marcus walking beside him. The weight of expectation, his mother's dying wish, his own promise, the hundreds of guests gathered to witness the union, pressed down on him with each step. At the altar, beneath an archway of white roses, Robert took his position beside the officiant. The string quartet transitioned to Pachelbel's canon, signaling the start of the procession. Zara came first, looking beautiful but solemn in the pale blue dress Vanessa had selected, followed by Vanessa's bridesmaids in coordinating shades. Then the music changed to the traditional wedding march, and the assembled guests rose as Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle. She was undeniably stunning in a designer gown of creamy silk, her blonde hair elegantly arranged beneath a cathedral veil. As she walked toward him on her father's arm, Robert could appreciate objectively that she was everything a man in his position could want. Beautiful, sophisticated, appropriate, yet as she reached him, and her father placed her hand in his, Robert felt nothing of the breathless anticipation he had experienced when Alicia walked toward him on their wedding day. No racing heart, no overwhelming sense of rightness, no feeling that his life was truly beginning at that moment. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed garden. Robert responded mechanically to the opening remarks, his mind strangely detached from the proceedings. When they reached the vows, Vanessa turned to face him, her expression a perfect blend of dignity and restrained joy. "Do you, Robert James Howell, take Vanessa Elizabeth Hamilton to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" In the brief pause that followed, Robert became acutely aware of Zara's gaze fixed on him from her position beside the altar. Her words from the previous night echoed in his mind. "I don't think you should marry someone you don't love like that." The moment stretched as he prepared to speak the words that would bind him to Vanessa. Then, at the periphery of his awareness, came a disturbance, a murmur from the guests, heads turning toward the garden entrance. Robert looked past Vanessa, following the direction of the guests' attention, and the world seemed to stop turning. A woman stood at the garden gate, wearing a simple blue dress, her dark hair lifting slightly in the breeze. Despite the decade that had passed, despite the subtle changes time and hardship had etched onto her features, he would have known her anywhere. Alicia. Time suspended as Robert stared at the impossible vision at the garden gate. A decade of grief and longing crystallized into a single moment of disbelief. It couldn't be her. He had watched the yacht section containing Alicia sink beneath Lake Lucerne. He had funded an exhaustive search that found nothing. He had mourned her, buried her memory in his heart, raised their daughter with stories of the mother she couldn't remember. Yet something deeper than rational thought recognized her instantly. His heart, which had beat steadily through board meetings and financial crises and years of single parenthood, suddenly faltered in his chest. Alicia? Her name escaped his lips as a question, a prayer, a plea. Beside him, Vanessa turned to follow, his gaze, confusion evident in her expression. The assembled guests shifted uneasily, whispers rippling through the crowd as the officiant paused, uncertain how to proceed. In the profound silence that followed, Zara's voice rang out with crystal clarity. "Mommy!" The single word, spoken with a child's perfect conviction, broke the spell of immobility that had gripped Robert. He moved without conscious thought, stepping past a stunned Vanessa, walking with increasing speed down the aisle toward the woman, who couldn't possibly be standing there but was. Zara was faster, breaking from her position beside the altar and running toward Alicia with the headlong abandon of a child who somehow recognized the mother she had lost before she could form memories. As Robert neared, details came into sharp focus. The small scar near Alicia's temple that hadn't been there before, the subtle lines at the corners of her eyes, the way she held herself as if expecting pain. Her eyes, though, those were unchanged, still the warm brown that had captivated him from the first moment they met. "You're dead," he said when he reached her, his voice strangled. "We searched for weeks. The yacht went down. You were gone." Alicia reached a trembling hand toward his face, not quite touching him. "I survived," she said simply. "I was found by a fisherman miles from the accident. I had amnesia, didn't know who I was for years." Robert stared at her, drinking in details that only confirmed the impossible truth. The small scar near her temple that hadn't been there before, the subtle hollowing of her cheeks, the way she held herself as if expecting pain. Yet beneath these changes was unquestionably Alicia, his Alicia, returned from the dead. "Daddy?" Zara's voice broke the moment. She had stopped a few feet away, her expression a complex blend of confusion, hope, and fear. Is she really? Alicia knelt carefully, bringing herself to Zara's eye level. "The last time I saw you," she said softly, "you were wearing a yellow sundress with daisies embroidered on the pockets. You had just learned to say Dada and were trying to say Mama. Your favorite stuffed animal was a blue elephant named Ellie." Zara's eyes widened, her breath catching on a sob. "Mommy!" The word broke whatever paralysis had gripped Robert. He moved forward just as Zara launched herself into Alicia's arms, catching them both as Alicia's still recovering strength faltered beneath the impact. The three of them sank to the ground together, a tangle of limbs and tears and desperate embraces. "You're real," Robert kept saying, his hands moving over Alicia's face, her hair, her shoulders, as if to confirm her solidity. "You're really here." Alicia turned her face into his palm, kissing it with trembling lips. "I never stopped trying to get back to you. Even when I couldn't remember your name, I dreamed of your face." Zara clung to her mother, sobbing with the unrestrained emotion of a child who had been given a miracle. "I knew it," she repeated between tears. "I told Daddy you might come back." Behind them, the wedding guests had risen from their seats, a sea of confused faces and whispered questions. Vanessa stood frozen at the altar, her perfect composure finally shattered by the unfolding scene. With tremendous effort, Alicia disentangled herself from Robert and Zara's embrace and rose shakily to her feet. She approached Vanessa with dignity, despite her simple dress and obvious exhaustion. "I'm so sorry," she said sincerely. "I know this must be impossible to understand, but I couldn't let him marry you without knowing I was alive." Vanessa stared at her, shock gradually giving way to comprehension. "You're her. Alicia Renee Howell, his wife." "Yes." Alicia's voice held no triumph, only a quiet certainty. "I've spent 10 years trying to come home to my family. A complex series of emotions crossed Vanessa's face: disbelief, anger, embarrassment, and finally, a resigned acceptance. She carefully removed the engagement ring from her finger and placed it in Robert's hand, closing his fingers around it. "I believe this belongs to you," she told him quietly. Then, with remarkable composure, she turned and walked back down the aisle, her father stepping forward to escort her from the garden. The next hours passed in a blur. The wedding guests were politely dismissed with explanations that revealed just enough to satisfy immediate curiosity without exposing the deeply personal nature of the reunion. Robert's staff, trained to handle any contingency with perfect discretion, managed the logistics of cancelling caterers and dismantling decorations while protecting the family's privacy. Marcus René, overcome with emotion at his daughter's miraculous return, hardly left Alicia's side as she recounted her incredible journey: the fisherman's rescue, the months in a coma, the amnesia that had robbed her of her identity, the years of struggle through refugee centers and bureaucratic nightmares to find her way home. "The embassy confirmed it was me," she explained, showing the emergency documentation they had provided. "DNA testing, fingerprints, everything, but I couldn't call first. I needed to see you, to explain in person." "Even if it meant arriving at my wedding to another woman?" Robert asked, still unable to fully process the magnitude of her return. "I had to take the chance that what we had wasn't completely gone," Alicia replied, her voice soft but certain, "that you might still feel something for me, even after all this time." "Feel something?" Robert repeated incredulously. "Alicia, I've loved you every day for the past 10 years. I've never stopped loving you. Not for a moment." As evening fell, Zara reluctantly agreed to go to bed, extracting numerous promises from Alicia that she would still be there in the morning. "You won't disappear again?" she asked, her voice small despite her usual confidence. "Never," Alicia promised fiercely, holding her daughter close. "I fought too hard to get back to you." After Zara was finally asleep, Robert and Alicia found themselves alone for the first time in a decade. They sat in the master bedroom, the space Robert had barely entered since her death. "Nothing has changed," Alicia observed, looking around at the room they had once shared. "Everything changed," Robert corrected gently. "But I couldn't change this room. It was all I had left of you." She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. "Marcus told me about Vanessa." Robert stiffened slightly, guilt washing through him despite having no rational reason for it. "My mother, before she died, she made me promise to try living again." "I understand," Alicia said softly. 10 years is a long time to be alone." "I was never not in love with you," Robert said with sudden fierceness. "Not for a single day." Tears welled in Alicia's eyes. "And I never stopped trying to get back to you, even when I didn't know your name." The distance between them, physical and temporal, seemed suddenly unbearable. Robert moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "May I?" he began, then stopped, unsure how to ask permission to kiss his own wife after 10 years of believing her dead. Alicia answered by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, an exploration rather than a homecoming. Both of them changed by time and circumstance. Then something familiar ignited between them, the connection that had drawn them together from their first meeting, the passion that neither time nor tragedy had extinguished. Robert's arms encircled her, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Alicia made a soft sound against his mouth, her hands finding their way into his hair, relearning the texture of it between her fingers. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Robert rested his forehead against hers. "I'm afraid I'm going to wake up," he confessed, "that this is just another dream, more vivid than the others, but still just a dream." "Not a dream," Alicia assured him, taking his hand and placing it over her heart. "Feel that? Real? I'm real." Their conversation continued deep into the night, filling in the missing years. Robert told her about raising Zara, about the foundation established in her name, about the endless search on Lake Lucerne that had nearly broken him. Alicia shared the fragments she remembered from her rescue, the slow process of recovery, the dreams of him that had sustained her through the darkest times. "There's something I need to do," Robert said around midnight, reluctantly pulling away from her embrace. He crossed to his closet and retrieved a small wooden box from the back of a shelf. "Your rings," he explained, opening it to reveal her wedding and engagement rings nestled in velvet. "They recovered them from the yacht. I kept them safe for you." Alicia extended her left hand, which had borne the subtle tan line of absent rings for 10 years. "Would you?" With fingers that trembled slightly, Robert slid the rings onto her finger, the gesture achingly reminiscent of their wedding day. When he finished, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the rings, now restored to their proper place. "I should let you rest," he said reluctantly. "The doctor, Marcus Brought, said you still need to take things slowly." Alicia tightened her grip on his hand. "Stay, please. I've been without you for 10 years. I can't bear another night apart." That night, after a decade of separation, Robert and Alicia rediscovered each other with tender passion. Their lovemaking bridged the years that had divided them, healing wounds that time alone could not touch. Every caress was both a remembrance and a rediscovery, every kiss a promise of the future they had been given, against all odds. "I love you," Robert whispered against her skin, his touch both familiar and new. "I never stopped loving you." "And I never stopped fighting to come back to you," Alicia replied, her hands tracing the contours of his face as if committing it to memory all over again. As dawn broke over the Hamptons estate, Robert Howell held his wife in his arms, watching her sleep with wonder that still hadn't diminished. His billions had failed to find her when she was lost, yet somehow she had found her way back to him through a decade of struggle and countless obstacles. Alicia stirred, her eyes opening to find him watching her. She smiled, the same smile that had captivated him at a museum gala years ago, before his wealth or her father's opposition had tested their love. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice soft with lingering sleep. "That I spent 10 years believing I had lost everything that truly mattered," Robert replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And that from now on, my wealth will serve only one purpose, making sure we're never separated again." Alicia reached up to touch his face, her eyes reflecting the same certainty he felt. "We already have everything that matters," she said simply, as the morning light filled the room, illuminating their entwined figures. Robert knew she was right. All his billions couldn't have retrieved what fate had restored to him. His true love returned against impossible odds, making their family complete once more.